I'm a physicist primarily, and I use my physics to study the ocean. And I write things, and I'm interested in sharing science with people. So, but I think the important thing about that is I don't see science as something which is parked in a corner, separate to everything else. It's a part of culture, it's a part of the rest of the world, and there's all these amazing links you can make between scientific knowledge and the ways of thinking about the world, and places in sort of culture and music and comedy where they all link up. So yes, I do that sort of thing, and Cosmic Shambles, are there some of the people I do it with. So we're all linked.
Which, I mean, takes us to sort of why we're here. Obviously, I think people are going to see and hear about Latitude Festival and think of musicians. And I was just looking at the lineup. There are obviously all sorts of really great musicians. They're probably not going to be expecting, science next to Fatboy Slim or whoever else. So what drew you to it? What's sort of the plan? How do you plonk science down in the middle of a music festival, and what does that look like?
Well, the thing about Latitude is it's never just been music, really. I think it's always had all these other things, and there's comedy there, and there's sort of culture in various other ways, and so it feels like a very natural extension. And actually, we've been at Latitude for several years. I mean, I think I've been most of the past 6 or 7 years, apart from the pandemic years. And what we find is it fits in really well, because fundamentally people who go to Latitude are just interested in interesting things. And yes, they'd like a bit of music, but even the most hardcore music fan doesn't necessarily need music for every hour of the day. And so there's other interesting things to listen to. So what we have found in the past is that people are well up for sitting in a tent and just hearing discussions on, I don't know, maybe a little bit of astrophysics, maybe the physics of trees, the sort of more everyday parts of life, some medicine, some atmospheric physics, so actually, and all of these things are mixed in, and the other thing, of course, that Shambles loves to do is the film. There's this thing called the Uncanny Film Club, where they proper hardcore film nuts look at often sci-fi films and sort of analyze them and share them. So actually it fits in really naturally, and I don't think it's true that science is separate to society. I think that was the view, back in the 60s. It was either you were a scientist or you were a humanities person, and you certainly weren't allowed to be both. But we know better than that now, right? If you look at a tree, you can see many things in that tree. You can see it. You can see it's beautiful just as a tree. You can think about all the people who've written about trees and said beautiful things about trees. You can look at the science of the tree. You can look at how humans relate to the tree. It just kind of keeps getting better and better. And so basically, it's all folded in together. And we tend to find at Latitude that, people are, 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, actually sit in a nice warm tent, get a bit of shade from the sun, and listen to some bubble science or tree science or star science, and it's quite nice. So yes, that's why we're there. It actually fits in really well.
Yeah, perfect. And they are going to be able to listen to you talk about so many things, I gather. Your weekend sounds absolutely stacked. So it'd be useful, I think, maybe, and this is probably a useful way of giving people a sense of what will be happening in the forest too. It'd be useful maybe to run through some of the things you've got on, and kind of what you're thinking about them, and looking forward to them. The first one I have here actually is a sort of celeb spot. Chris Packham, you'll be chatting to him. What do you think you guys will find to talk about there?
Oh, well, I mean, Chris covers a lot of topics, right? And the last time I worked with him was probably 10 years ago on Operation Iceberg. So we've got some catching up to do in the meantime. But obviously his two major areas of focus are the environment and biodiversity. So there's lots to talk about there. And also the broad topic of being neurodiverse and how it works when people's brains work a little bit differently, and what all the amazing contribution, the sort of richness that offers to the world in points of view. And so I think with Chris, those are there'll be loads to talk about. I mean, he's never short of interesting things to say, but that's the combination with him. And then I think moving on to some of the other things that we will be doing. We'll be talking about how climate change is affecting the ocean. So in a separate panel, this is separate debate. Because lots of people care about the ocean, they think about it a lot, but we don't really talk very much about what the ocean is, or how, we tend to think climate change matters for those of us on land, but not in the ocean. And of course it matters there as well. And then from that, we've got some dark matter. Anyone who's into that astrophysics and know cosmology knows there's a bit of dark matter out there in the universe. And so that's some of the sort of the more sciencey side of things. But the other things that are going on is that there is this street of museums that will be in the cosmic shambles forest of science and culture. And so Royal Museums Greenwich, which includes the Royal Observatory, will be there talking about some of their science. The Crab Museum. Now, the Crab Museum is actually new to me. I've not met them. I'm told that they are really keen to talk about the evolution of the anus, which is apparently very related to crabs in some ways. And of course, at a festival, one of the traditional views of a festival is that people spend a lot of time queuing for the toilets. So maybe they would appreciate thinking about ani, as I believe the proper plural is, as they're doing that. So there's that. There's the Centre for Computing History and some stargazing in the evening. So we often try stargazing. We don't always get cloudless skies, but we're prepared to have a go. So, sometimes there's one of the big bands in the background. Maybe you can't get close enough to the stage. Well, you can come and look through a telescope and contemplate the universe instead. And then we've got some podcasts as well. There's an episode of They've Made Us, which is a podcast I do with Robin Ince. And so we'll be talking to Rhys Shearsmith and Tanita Tikram on that. And so all these, and so that's all about where people came from and the influences that, brought them to where they are in life and what was important to them. So basically the whole thing is just this mishmash of interesting ideas. They've got a science or a culture thread running through them, but everything, it's just, why not be interested? One of the things about being adults in the modern day is that the world is constantly telling us that we're too busy, right? We've got to do very important things because we're adults and we're busy, and we've got to do all the boring, sensible admin, and the admin never goes away. And we sort of forget that we're allowed to play a little bit. We're allowed to think about the world. Isn't that one of the best things about being human? And so, this is a great opportunity. Sit in the sunshine and actually think about some of those things that maybe the everyday world doesn't give you time to think about. And that's what this forest of science and culture is all about.
And I suppose, like, as I mean, I said it was maybe strange to have those two things together. I think you very, very much convinced me otherwise. But at the same time, you think of a festival and it's kind of going into the forest and allowing maybe yourself to have a bit more time to think and a bit more time to explore things that you wouldn't necessarily interact with in your daily life. And that might be a band you've never heard of, but it might also be the evolutionary history of the crab's anus, or whatever else you run into in the forest. And it's very clear. I mean, you mentioned going there from climate change in the ocean to dark matter, very much at the right beneath us and the very biggest things above us. What are the sort of the big questions that you would like, either down there or up there? What are the big questions you would like to be playing with? And I mean, this doesn't have to be that weekend. I'd love to hear what you want to learn from that weekend too. But more generally, what are the kind of big questions that are keeping you busy and engaged?
Keeping me up. Well, so I'm not an astronomer, but today, actually, all the astronomers are really excited because there's a new telescope called the Vera Rubin telescope that has just, its first pictures have been published today. So the telescope's in Chile, so they've been building it and preparing it. And today the first pictures came. And the thing that telescope is going to allow us to do is to kind of watch the universe in high definition continually. So normally astronomers have to choose, are we going to point our telescope over there, or are we going to point it over there? And if you're looking at the first place, you're not looking at the second. And the point of view, the reason that everyone's excited about this telescope is that it will let them look at everything all at once, and of course save it all, so they can go back and basically replay the universe and watch anything exciting over again. So that's what's happening in the world of astronomy at the moment, that they're all very excited about. And when it comes to the ocean, there are some really interesting questions. you know, we're still finding out how the ocean works in a lot of ways. It is a big liquid engine. You know, it defines our planet. The things the ocean does are actually really important for the way we experience the land, you know, where it rains and where it floods. All of that is dictated by the ocean. And one of the most exciting areas, I think, in deep sea science is what's happening in the really deep sea. So the average depth of the ocean out in the middle of the ocean basins is about 4 kilometers. So it's a lot of water. It's a long way down. And there's weird creatures that live down there that we don't know a lot about them, because the problem is if we bring them up to the surface, they tend to kind of burst because they're used to living under all this pressure. And so you can't just bring them up to the surface because they sort of go pop. And so we don't know very much about how they live, but we do know that they're down there. They're living quite slowly. They're living quite weird lives. And there's an enormous diversity of them. And so what I think one of the big interesting questions in the deep sea is what's actually going on down there, because it's definitely there and it's definitely important, but it's too dark for a human. It's too deep, it's under too much pressure, it happens too slowly for us. So we kind of need technology to help us speed it up a bit and look at it and really see what's going on. So that's one of the big questions. And then one of the other questions that's coming up quite a lot in biology at the moment, in ocean biology, is how animals help to move nutrients around. So you know, we need nutrients, we need our, you know, vitamins and all the rest of it. It's the same for creatures in the ocean. And the thing about the ocean is some places are really rich in some nutrients and really poor in others. So for example, the tropics are quite poor in nitrogen, but if you go to the Arctic, what you're missing is iron. And it's been recently been found that whales, for example, they feed in the cold water close to the poles, and then they swim to the tropics, and then they don't eat in the tropics because they're giving birth and mating and all of that kind of thing, but they're still living, so they pee. Basically, they deposit urine, and that fertilizes the tropics. So it dumps nitrogen into this place where there isn't very much nitrogen, and that helps. It's really significant, you know, as an amount of fertilizer. It really matters. And so even, you know, we don't have nearly as many whales as we used to in the ocean because we took a lot of them out, but just a whale moving and basically peeing somewhere else is contributing to the ecosystem in that other place. So we're learning how animals are helping to move nutrients around the ocean. So animals aren't just passive in the environment, you know, they're actually doing things that contribute to what can live where. They're building the ecosystem, the environment themselves. So those questions are really topical in ocean science, and there's loads more, but that's, you know, that's a little bit of the high up and the low down.
They're really good ones. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned those kind of extremophiles underneath, and we've talked about the Rubin Observatory up there. And I suppose one of the things that I always find really fascinating is how you can join those two things together, right? Because in learning just how strange some of those things live down there in ways that we haven't imagined, that might also help us understand or guess at what anything that lives up above.
Yeah, we're very arrogant as humans in that we think we're normal. And of course, normal is very relative. Like, you know, we live in an air atmosphere that's got about this much pressure on a planet that's got about this much gravity with these sorts of atoms around. And so we assume that walking around on 2 legs, as we do, is perfectly normal behavior. And of course, it isn't. And I often say the closest we'll ever see to alien life is in the ocean, because the physics is the same, but the things that matter are different, because you've got water everywhere. So it's hard to move because you've got to push through all this water, and you've got pressure, and then you've got, it's more difficult to find things, you know, things don't move around as easily underwater necessarily. So you've got different sets of priorities, and that lets you evolve in a different way. And possibly my favorite example of this is the worm that has 1,000 anuses. Anuses have featured a lot in this podcast, in this Instagram live. But yeah, so, you know, they these are things that live actually in quite shallow water sometimes. It's a little worm. It finds a sponge, which is actually an animal. So that's where sponges came from originally, sort of things with lots of holes in them. And it buries its head down in the bottom of the sponge, and then it grows. And as it grows up, it branches, it grows through the holes, but it branches and branches and branches until the tails eventually all, so the head's stuck down the bottom still, it's growing through the sponge. And eventually the tails all reach the surface, and then they're all just poking around on the surface. So you've got 1,000 little anuses kind of sitting around on the surface. And then when this thing wants to go and mate, obviously it's not going dating, it's not getting out of its sponge. So what happens? Yeah, right. It sounds complicated, doesn't it? It sounds like some management is required. So then what happens next is what the little anuses grow eyes, and the digestive bits kind of atrophy, they die out, and it grows little gonads, and then the tails break away, the little anuses, swim up to the surface. They're either male or female. They get on with the mating up there. They meet some other little anuses that's swimming around. And then once that's done, the new larvae kind of float back down to the bottom of the ocean, and it starts all over again. There's no reason that it couldn't be normal. It's just not our normal, right? So I think the oceans are really interesting. If just on this planet, just with our amount of gravity and our amount of water, look how much variety we get. So of course, then when we look at other planets, potential, and we're seeing there's exoplanets are found by their thousands now. There's loads of them out there. Most of them do not appear to be habitable, but we're finding so many that some of them must be. And then you can ask a lot of questions about what the rules, if you tweak the rules a little bit, say you've got a very heavy methane atmosphere or something, then what does that do to the life? And you can absolutely guarantee that whatever's out there is far better than anything we can imagine. So there is this, Earth is one data point in how a planet with life can evolve. And look at all the variety we've got. So yes, it's only going to get better. I don't think it's likely we're ever going to be talking to the aliens, but I bet they're really interesting. I bet they look weird.
Yeah, I don't even know where I'd start in a chat with 1,000 anus.
Asking whether it run out of toilet paper, that's probably where you'd start.
And I mean, I don't want to be too much of a downer given why we're here, but like you think about all that stuff, you I think inevitably end with this incredible sense of wonder of what we've got on this planet. But as we talked about, you've got a couple of sessions on at Latitude about climate change, and that's sort of haunting all of that. And you think about all these incredible creatures, and some of them aren't doing as well as they ought to be. I wonder, to counteract that, maybe that sense of gloom, and I'm sure this must be part of your thinking too. If you're doing a panel about climate change during a music festival, you probably want to give people a bit of joy and hope. Given all of your, the depth of your work across so many of the bits of science that touch on climate change and its kind of associated questions, are you hopeful? Are there reasons to be excited? Can we parlay that sense of wonder from thinking about those admittedly slightly horrible but nonetheless incredibly valuable creatures? Can we parlay that into anything that might make us feel a bit more hopeful about the Earth?
Yeah. So there's a Hawaiian navigator, Noah Thompson, who said something that really sticks with me. And he said, you can't protect what you don't understand, and you won't if you don't care. And those are the two fundamental steps. And actually, the reason for optimism is that most people do care. And there's this weird thing where people, not everyone is shouting all the time about what they're thinking. So it's very easy to think that the only people who care are, the oil companies, a small number of people that want to keep burning fossil fuels. Actually, consistent studies globally show that the vast majority of people do want action on the environment. They do care. And it's just that they are sometimes they think everyone else doesn't care. That's the interesting thing. So I think talking about these things, is really important, because it shows us all, look how many of us care about this. Like, we want something different. So that's the second part of that quote. And then the first part of it, that we have to understand it in order to protect it. I think we're doing much better with that. And obviously, scientifically, we have lots of information, but I think what we haven't necessarily done well as scientists is get really good at painting a picture of what our planet is, what it means to be a citizen of this planet, and how we connect to all of this stuff. When it comes to the technical solutions for climate change, we have them. We know how renewable energy works. We know the things that are causing pollution. Like, we know a lot about the problem, and we know a lot about the solutions. So the thing that gives me optimism is that we already know how to solve this problem, right? We already care enough to solve it. Now we just have to put the jigsaw pieces together. And the thing that I see, you know, in my everyday life, working at a university, and also, you know, as a host of BBC Radio 4's Rare Earth and all the various other things that I do, is I am talking to people all of the time that take these problems seriously, that are trying to do things. It's absolutely built in to the way that the university works, to the way that these companies are working. You know, they want to make this happen, and they are out there making it happen. Like just today, I was at an amazing seminar at my university with someone who was talking about making biodegradable plastics from bacteria that you can put into the human body to fix something, and then after they've kind of been the patch, they will biodegrade within the body, and they'll just float away. So you have all the benefits of plastic, but you've got something that within the body is going to biodegrade. It's going to turn into something harmless, and you've patched the heart or the nerve or whatever it is. And so, and she's got a company that is making that material, that is starting to scale up, that is making that happen. And so all around me, I see people who care, and I see people who know enough, and I see people who are doing. And that's the third thing, is you've got to do whatever environment you're in. And I see it happening, right? So of course we could go faster, we need to work harder, all of that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, like, we're making a lot of progress. It isn't all visible yet, because some of it's just at the start, but I am optimistic. And I think the more we are talking about this, the more these conversations go, and the more we say that, you know what, it's better if we have an electrified world and we're not breathing in air pollution. It's better if we can make plastics, sort of temporary plastics, from bacteria that then biodegrade when they're not used. It's just better. This isn't a hair shirt solution to the world, right? It's just better and more modern. So let's just do it. You know,
it's like that little cartoon, right, where it's like, oh, what if it turns out we've made everything so much nicer, and
if we made a better world for nothing.
And I suppose, like, to go back to where we started, you know, as you mentioned, that that's not just a technical question or a technical problem, right? It's getting that kind of communal sense of needing to do something and what we're going to do. It will require scientists, it will require engineers, it will require technicians of all kinds. It will also require the artists. It will require us to make a kind of a new cultural landscape that fosters that.
And it will require just anyone who's not in any of those categories, who walks into their local community hall or their local sports club or their local school and says, you know what, why don't we start a wildflower garden? Why don't we just not use single-use plastics? Let's not serve water in plastic bottles. Those little things are going to be really important. And, you know, I see so many community groups as well that are just doing it. They're not waiting for someone else to solve the problem. They're saying, you know what, in my church hall or in my sort of whatever the environment is, I can do this. And that is so powerful because it's really changing things on the ground. So everybody, it's not just the scientists and the artists and the engineers. Of course, they're important people, but just think if everybody in every community centre and sports club in the country made those changes, right? That's amazing. And we can do that. So everybody, whatever route, sometimes I've had people say to me, oh, well, you know, you're in the rooms with all the politicians and the important people. How do I get to be in that room? And I say, every room is that room. So everything you do matters. And, you know, we're all doing it together. So it's great. We're all going to learn. It's not a competition. We're just going to do amazing things and learn from each other. And it's going to be fun. So,
Perfect. Well, I think that's incredibly inspiring, exciting, hopeful. Many other adjectives besides place to end. And one final.
It's going to be culturally wonderful. So come to the cosmic Shambles Forest of Science and Culture at Latitude and share in all the wonder for all of these things.
Get among, you know, as you suggest, get among people who are infused and inspired and excited by the same things you are, and hopefully we can all find some
best thing ever. Brilliant.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very
that's
much.
really exciting, and hope everyone's enjoyed themselves and get to see you at Latitude too.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
See you at Latitude.
Bye.
Bye.